How long can an officer hold you on the side of the road after issuing a traffic citation to you? And I'll tell you right after this. This question is answered by a 2015 Supreme Court case, United States versus Rodriguez. In that case, Mr. Rodriguez is driving on a Nebraska highway.
Here's something the whole gang can get comfortable in. A 1998 Mercury Mountaineer.
He veers off the road for about 2-3 seconds. His right tires go over the white line on the highway, and then he veers back into his lane. A cop pulls him over.
Pull over! No, it's a cardigan, but thanks for noticing. Yeah! Killer boots, man!
Asks him how come he veered off the highway. Mr. Rodriguez explains that he saw a pothole that he was trying to avoid. Under Nebraska law, it is illegal to drive on an emergency lane, so the cop proceeds to write him a warning. He asks Mr. Rodriguez if he wishes to come out of the car. Mr. Rodriguez refuses. So the officer goes back into the cruiser to write a citation. In this case, it was basically a warning. The officer then walked to Mr. Rodriguez's vehicle and handed over a warning. Later on, the officer testified in court that at that point, all of the reasons why he pulled over Mr. Rodriguez were over. The citation was issued and the traffic stop was complete. However, he did ask Mr. Rodriguez if it was okay for him to then walk a canine unit around the vehicle to search for narcotics. Mr. Rodriguez refused. So the officer called backup. They waited another 7 minutes on the roadway. When the backup arrived, the first officer then took the canine unit and walked around the car. The canine unit did find narcotics in the vehicle, and so now Mr. Rodriguez wants to suppress the narcotics, says it's a violation of his Fourth Amendment. It was not reasonable for the officer to prolong the stop. Here's what the court says. Absent independent, reasonable suspicion, a police officer may not prolong or extend the stop beyond that of a reasonable time, and he could not conduct the search by the canine, and that search did violate the Constitution. So what do we take away from this case? An officer has to be actively pursuing his mission when he pulls over the vehicle. Meaning, if the officer pulls over a vehicle for speeding, he has to be actively writing a ticket for speeding. If he pulls over a vehicle for registration, he might check registration, but he may not prolong the stop and do other searches or investigate other things. Now, the Supreme Court says there's also several other things that an officer can do. These are typical of all traffic stops. He can check driver's licenses, he can check proof of insurance, he can check the registration, he can check if the driver has outstanding warrants, but that's about it. Those are typical things that are found in all traffic stops. The government argues a number of things that ultimately fail, but they're interesting arguments. One, they say that the officer could have done the canine search for his own safety. Now that argument really fails because if the officer was concerned for his own safety, he should have really done the canine unit search first and not wait until he issued the citation when he walked that dog. The second argument that the government says the reason why they could have done this search is basically an officer who does his work quickly sort of buys more time at the end. Now, the Supreme Court does not buy into this argument. They say that the test is a reasonable officer. If you're an officer who does your job quickly, you don't get rewarded with more time to investigate other things. If it took you several minutes to write a citation, well, that's how long it took you to write a citation. You don't get more time. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe and tell your friends about this channel.